Do you think the United States will resume support for Ukraine at some point, or is that off the table now?
No, I think they will. I think that this is a bit of a bargaining ploy. It's a very serious one because there are billions and billions still in the pipeline. By the way, also billions and billions that need to be spent in the United States to replenish our own stocks. Much more of that, frankly, than what is in the pipeline. But as I mentioned, the key is that there are certain capabilities that only the US can provide to Ukraine and that really can't be replicated by the European countries, although in many other areas that is certainly possible.
So some have speculated that the US actually loses leverage by cutting off aid, but you don't quite see it that way?
Well, I think if there is a sense that you can get that assistance flowing again, if you take certain actions, and I think Ukraine has definitely gotten the message on that, then I think that is considerable leverage, yes. And it can be considerable leverage as well when it comes to getting Ukraine to accept whatever the terms of the ceasefire are. Though I frankly agree with President Zelensky that a critical element that needs to identify is what would the guarantee be. Keep in mind that when Russia launched this in the first place, there had been something called the Budapest Memorandum signed decades earlier, right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, in which the US, UK, and Russia assured Ukraine that we would be there to help secure them if they gave up the nuclear weapons that were still on their soil when the USSR collapsed. Everyone agreed to that. The nuclear weapons were dealt with. That didn't help them in 2014 when Russia occupied Crimea and parts of the southeastern part of the country known as the Donbass. There were additional agreements following that, many of them spearheaded by European leaders, especially Chancellor Merkel at the time. That didn't help him a whole heck of a lot in February 2022 when the full-on invasion was launched by Russia. So I think it's fair. It's imperative, really, for President Zelensky to ask what will be the security guarantee. We've heard some encouraging words, very impressive words, actually, from Prime Minister Starmer of the UK, President Macron, and others who have committed to putting boots on the ground. But I still haven't heard what they're actually going to give the mission to these units that are on the ground, and in particular, how they would respond if Russia breaks the ceasefire. That is the key. And no one yet has provided the answer to that. And in truth, by the way, they're also using the term peacekeeping. There isn't any peace to keep in Ukraine if Russia stops attacking and stops its offensive operations on the ground. This is not the former Yugoslavia where you had three warring factions in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where I spent a year of my life, by the way, as the chief of operations of the NATO force there, and then also chased war criminals and terrorists with a U.S. hat. It's not Haiti, where I also served as chief operations, albeit for a UN force, where there were very serious criminal elements and gangs that needed to be suppressed in order to make progress there. The Ukrainian police are more than capable of keeping the peace in the 80% of their country that they still control. It's really all about what will be done to Russia if it breaks the ceasefire. And it shouldn't, of course, be just kinetic response. It should be further reimposition, most likely then, of even more draconian financial and economic sanctions. Can I just follow on to the cost of securing Ukraine? The cost of not securing Ukraine will be much, much greater. That would be a catastrophe for Europe and NATO. And of course, we still are the leader of NATO. I've been, as a 1, 3, and 4-star general alone, served in NATO positions. And the US foundation to any NATO operation is critically important. And then beyond that, as Andrew Roberts and I repeatedly mentioned in our book, Conflict, the Evolution of Warfare from 1945 to Gaza, we observe that what you do in one part of the world influences perceptions in other parts. And if we were not to continue to help Ukraine in its hour of need, a country that shares our values and principles and so forth, what would that effect be out in the Indo-Pacific region? Would people see our unwillingness to help Ukraine as an indicator of what might happen out in the Indo-Pacific if there was a threat out there?
I wonder what you think the U.S. should ask of Russia in trying to come to an agreement over in these peace negotiations.
First and fundamental, obviously, is to stop shooting into Ukraine on a nightly basis. These glide bombs, ballistic missiles, hundreds of drones and every 24 hours, many of those from Tehran, I might mention. Stop the offensive on the ground. There's other demands that should be placed. Some are going to be for negotiating leverage. And I'm a little uncomfortable again that we haven't made Russia give up something to get some of these that we might have held them to. At the end of the day, though, really, I think it does come back to the security guarantee. And I'd really want to know, especially if I were in President Zelensky's shoes or those of his senior officials and military leaders, what will that guarantee consist of?
Without those guarantees, doesn't that just embolden China with its own sovereignty claims, whether it's Taiwan or elsewhere in the Indo-Pacific? Getting to your earlier point.
Well, it could very easily undermine deterrence. Keep in mind that deterrence is a function of two elements. One is the potential adversary's assessment of your capabilities. The other is the assessment of your willingness to employ those capabilities. And for deterrence in the Indo-Pacific to be rock solid, noting that there are other elements that should come into the equation as well, but it's the military that is the foundation of deterrence. There should be no doubt about our capabilities, noting, by the way, that we need to transform more rapidly. And if the new administration, still new administration, is able to carry out rapid change in how we procure systems and so forth, that would be hugely significant.